Well, good afternoon. If you were able to find this session, then you have very, very strong powers of deduction and strong detective skills. So I congratulate you for making it here. I know many of you are probably anxious to get to the party, so let's just get started. What if, and this is a small audience. Some of this stuff was covered in the previous session, so we'll make it interactive. If you have questions, just please yell out. But please make sure you yell loud or just go to the mic. So what if you could take, if you own a website, if you could take that website and you could join it with an online community of over 300 million active users. And if you could have your users spend more time on your site, on your web application, because they're enjoying spending time on your site, doing interactive activities, real-time activities on that site. Well, you can do that. You can do that. You can both grow your audience, you can grow your user base, and I'm going to show you how you can have your users increase the stickiness of your website through the power of Windows Live Messenger. I'm Keiji Kanazawa. I'm a program manager with the Windows Live Messenger team. And a little later on, Nikhil Kotari from the developer division, many of you may be familiar with his work or his past sessions at MIX, he will be coming up to talk about a very cool way of programming Messenger. So what is Windows Live Messenger? Windows Live Messenger is the world's largest instant messaging network with over 300 million active users worldwide. Now, on any given day, there are over 100 million of those users sign into the Messenger system to look up their friends, chat with each other, and just engage in real-time activities. And Messenger scope is worldwide. In market after market, Messenger is the leading #1 messaging application. And it's synonymous with online real-time user communication. So Brazil, UK, Russia, Mexico, Canada. In all those markets, Messenger is an integral part of people's lives. And one of the great things about working on Messenger is when we hear from our customers after events like the tsunami or Katrina or other events like that, when people call us or send us mail saying, Messenger was the only way that I was able to keep in touch with my friends and my family back in India, back in Africa. When the cell phone network was down, when the phone networks were down, Messenger kept working. That's how I kept in touch with my friends. So Messenger has this power to bring people together in this huge, huge community of 300 million people. Now, so what can that actually mean to a website, to the web application or web community that you may have? Well, with over 300 million users, probably some of your visitors today are already Windows Live Messenger users. And they could be bringing to your website the over 30 billion contact relationships that they have amongst each other. Now, when you start throwing around numbers like billions, it's kind of like the US budget. It starts to kind of lose some real sense of meaning. So what that concretely means is that anytime a Windows Live Messenger user visits your site, they could be bringing with them dozens or hundreds. If you saw Angus's session, he gave you the number 70. But there are people who have, well in the hundreds of contacts. They could be telling those friends of theirs, their Messenger friends, about your site, saying, hey, this is a cool article I found on the web. Look at this. And they could do it directly from the website. So how do you do that? Last week, we announced the Windows Live Messenger Library. The Windows Live Messenger Library is a JavaScript client library for Messenger. What it enables you to do is it enables websites to sign users into the 300 million Messenger network directly from the web page. And it lets the users of the web page reach out to see the presence of their friends, send messages, receive messages, no matter where they are, connected to the Messenger network from. For example, they could be on a Messenger desktop client on a PC or on a Mac. They could be on an Xbox or a mobile device. Or they could be on another web page that is integrated with Messenger using the Messenger library. So for the rest of this talk, what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of websites that have incorporated real-time messaging functionality using the Messenger library and how they drive greater user engagement using the instant messaging capabilities. Next, I'm going to show, give you an example, give you ideas of the kind of applications you build using the Messenger library. And I'm going to go through an extended coding sample, building Messenger functionality into a website. After that, that's when Nikhil Kotari will join us on stage, will join me on stage. He'll talk to you about a tool called ScriptSharp. ScriptSharp is the tool that we use to build the Messenger library. He's going to show you how you can take advantage of that to improve the productivity in building Messenger library applications. Then we'll cover some guidelines in how you build Messenger applications, and then pointers to the resources that you need to get going. So the first demo I have is, if you're in Angus's session, you saw this a little bit already. It's called iBlocks. iBlocks is a partner that has built an online streaming video application. They partnered, for example, with Fox over here. This is a promo clip for an upcoming Alien versus Predator movie. So you can see that online. The distinguishing feature for iBlocks is that it's incorporated Messenger functionality. So you see this box here, the sign-in box, and it says Messenger. So if I click on that, I'm gonna be asked which account I want to sign in with, and then in a second, it's going to show my contact list over here. So you can see there's a Messenger contact list here. There's one user online called MIX08. That happens to be this Messenger client that I'm signed in with over here called MIX08. So what I can do from here is I can click on this and say, hey, check out this cool video. This one doesn't have spell checking, unlike Scott Guthrie's example in this morning. But what you can notice is, what you notice here is that iBlocks has actually added a link to this page directly into that message. So again, this enables the website to reach out to people in Messenger who are not on the iBlocks site, who may not even know what iBlocks is, and engage that user. So if I come over here, I'm sitting here on my desktop in some other computer, and my friend comes to sends me a message, and I can go directly to the iBlocks application right here. So again, this is the idea of using Messenger to grow your user base, to increase the awareness of your web application using the instant messaging capabilities of Messenger. So that's iBlocks. The other example is called Multimap. So if I come over here, Multimap, so for those of you from the UK, and there are at least a couple of you because you've built this application, it's one of the leading online mapping sites in the UK. And as you can see here, it's actually global in scope. So if I type in Venetian here, it actually shows me where we are. This is our location in Las Vegas right here. And the other thing you might notice is that this is actually running in Firefox. So the iBlocks that was running in IE, Messenger Library works perfectly well in Firefox. So you can do cross-browser development. So again, we have the sign-in box. I sign in here. And now I'm signed in to Messenger. And one thing I can do, and what you can see over here is, again, I'm signed in here. And I can here go and right-click here and set my location on live, if you can see this menu option. So I'm going to set my location on live. And that sets my personal message in Messenger to my current location. So if I go back to the Messenger client, now I see that MIX2, my buddy MIX2 is at this location. If I click on it, in a newer version of the client, you'll be able to actually click on that link. It'll take me to the mapping site, and I'll see where my friend is. And so Multimap is a UK company, so actually if in the UK context, they actually have even more meaningful locations that show up here instead of just geo coordinates. So that's another example where using the Power Messenger, a website can both advertise activities that other users are doing on the web, and then to try to bring them into the context of the activities that your friends are doing. So those are the two demos. And so you've seen both examples. In both examples, they enable people to just go to a web page, and without leaving that context of that web page, you can sign into Messenger, reach out to your friends. And so what the Windows Live Messenger library enables you to do is to build rich social applications. So the buzzword is, the big buzzword is rich interactive applications or rich internet applications. The Messenger library enables you to build rich social applications on top of those frameworks in which people can, again, reach out to their contacts. They can add new contacts. So in iBlocks, for example, maybe you'll see somebody that has a similar taste to you in videos. You can add them to your contact list. And why is that great? That's great for a website because it again increases the stickiness of the website. If you have a website where people meet people that they like, they're more likely to come back. And so by using the real-time engagement and the natural community that people the natural attraction that people have to communicating with people with similar tastes, you can take advantage of Messenger in building up the loyalty of users to your site. You can show what users are doing on your site. So two examples, both iBlocks showed it within a message, and then Multimap showed it in a personal message. And then the Messenger library also lets users interact with rich messaging capabilities. So a web application can actually build custom message types tailored to the application so that people using the same web application can exchange custom pieces of data. For example, if you have an online gaming application, you can send game moves back and forth using the Messenger library, as well as letting users chat while gaming at the same time. And you can start doing all this right now, today. So all the examples we're showing you today is live in production using released code, no beta code. Well, it is released as beta, but it's not private bits or anything like that. You can go and download the Messenger library right now and do exactly the same thing that you've seen. It's available for 32 markets worldwide. Those are all of the desktop Messenger client markets, except for 2 right-to-left languages. We're already working on supporting those. It's supported, as you saw, in IE and Firefox. IE6, IE7 works in IE8, and Firefox in both PC and Mac. And we're working to extend its capabilities to other browsers as well. This morning in Skaku's keynote, you may have heard about, with Silverlight 2, you get a choice of languages. Well, in kind of a similar but maybe a little smaller way, with the Messenger library, you also get a choice of languages, a choice of tools with which to code your application. It's a JavaScript client library, so of course, you can code your Messenger library application using JavaScript to your heart's content. If, however, you are a C# programmer, if you're somebody who loves using Visual Studio 2000, Studio set of tools and the support that you get from those, you can code your Messenger application using that as well, using C# with the tool, again, called ScriptSharp that Nikhil Kothari will talk about a little later. ScriptSharp essentially is a tool that takes a C# program and compiles it to JavaScript. So it basically treats JavaScript as kind of the machine language of the browser runtime. And again, Nikhil will show you how to do that, as well as the advantages that you get for programming Messenger library applications in C# with ScriptSharp. It's available right now. You can start coding right this second. If you go to dev.live.com/messenger, has links to everything that you need to get going. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start building a Messenger library application right here. So what we're going to do is build a simple Hello World application. Maybe it's been years since you've seen a Hello World application, but we're going to do one right here. So we're going to do 2 things. We're going to sign a user into a web page, and then let that user say hello to the world. So we're going to let the user type something in and then declare themselves to be online in Messenger. So those are the top and bottom boxes here. In order to facilitate that, the first step, sign in user, actually consists of 3 separate steps. First thing you need to do is create something called the sign-in control. The sign-in control you saw in the demos, it's that box that has the sign-in button. So that's a piece of UI that we offer that you just call our API to create it into your web page. Next thing is the user authenticates. The user clicks on the sign-in button, then the user authenticates. Once the user authenticates, we know who they are, and we're able to sign them into the Messenger service. And I'll talk in a second more about why we take this kind of multi-step approach in signing the user into the service. So let me actually now go over to here. So here I have basically an empty web page. Nothing really notable except the fact that the Messenger library works with any framework that can get a web page up into the user's web browser. So as long as you can create a web page, you can use the Messenger library. We're not tied to any specific frameworks. So the first thing I'm going to do, I need to actually load the Messenger library. And that's what this is doing. The Messenger library is this file here called messenger.js. You just load it from one of our files. And then I'm going to code the Messenger library, my application itself, into this file, messenger.js. Like we talked about, I need to create the thing called the sign-in control. So I'm going to just create a little HTML element to hold the sign-in control over here. It's just a div. I give it a name that later I'm going to reference. And then I also drag in a bit of HTML, again, to let the user type in something to say hello. So what I'm going to do, I have a text input box to let the user type in their personal message. Then there's a button to set the personal message. And that's it. That's all I need to do for the web page, pretty much. I do need to define a handler for the page, this window loading into the page. So once I've done that, I can go and code the actual JavaScript part. So the top up here may look a little strange. So you may realize that in Visual Studio 2008, we have added support for JavaScript IntelliSense. So when you're doing JavaScript coding, you get auto-completion, you get you get prompts about what type of arguments you need to type into a specific API call. And these 2 lines up here are basically helping Visual Studio know where to find the JavaScript file where it's going to get all of that information. So we provide a special version of the Messenger library file that has a lot of comments and stuff in it. You just need to reference that, and then you get the IntelliSense support. And I'll show you in an action in just a second. So I need that onload handler for the window loading. If you were at Angus's session, you saw something kind of similar to this. What I need to do is I need to create a sign-in control object. I give it a pointer to that DOM element where I want the sign-in control to appear. And then you need to pass in 2 things. You need to pass your privacy policy. As a Messenger library application, you need to have a published end-user privacy policy. And then you give us a link to something called a channel file, which is just a bit of glue that you need to facilitate communication between your site and the Messenger library. We give you the source for it. It's a very small piece of JavaScript. And then you tell us the market that you want the sign-in control to appear. So that sign-in button, again, it actually is available for 32 different markets. You just tell us. And the last thing is you give us a callback function that we'll call when the user has clicked on that sign-in button. So you take the control object, you add a authentication completed callback handler here, and now I'm going to go ahead and define that function. First, I'm going to add a global variable to hold the user context of the user object that I sign into the Messenger service. So that's what this is. And I'm going to define that function. And event handlers in the Messenger library have the familiar 2-argument pattern, at least familiar if you're a .NET programmer, with the 2 arguments. Sender is the sender of the event, and the second argument has any event-specific parameters. So I'm going to initialize the user object, and this is where some of the JavaScript IntelliSense comes in. So I can just very simply type ahead, and then when I create a user object, it tells me what I need to pass in. I need to pass in the identity of the user that's signed in. So that comes in the event-specific parameter here. So I just do that. Then I add a event handler for another callback for the completion of the user signing into the messenger service. And finally, I actually sign the user in. So I mentioned earlier that there's some logic behind this multi-step process of signing the user in. And that is because, for example, as an application, you might want to offer the ability for the user to set their status before they sign in, or set a different display name, or set a different personal message. So at this point, before you sign the user in, you can take those initialization steps, and then you sign the user in. So it's an advantage for the end user and for the application. So now I'm going to define the sign-in callback function. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to check the result of the sign-in operation. If it succeeds, I'm going to put up an alert box. And then I'm going to show the container for the UI that I have. So if you reference back here, I have this little container here that contains the input box for the personal message. I didn't actually display it at first. I display that. And the last thing is I just need some code to let the user set their personal message. So that's what this code is. So again, and so back here I had actually defined the on-click event handler when the user clicks on the set personal message button for this. And that's what this function is. So I just look at the text box where the user types the personal message, get the value, and then I reference the user object. I reference the presence of the user, and then I set the personal message property of the presence of that user to whatever is in that text box. So that's all I need to do. At this point, I can run the application. And as you can see, the sign-in control renders here. And so I'm going to pick an account to sign in. Oh, actually, what I want to do is, let me just go back here. Sign out. Let me just reload this here. And I need to change the account. Here we go. So I'm going to actually, I picked a different account. This account has never used the Contoso.com web application. So the first time that a user tries to sign into Messenger from a particular website, we ask them if this is something if they really want to do that, because the Messenger library gives access to a lot of data, like the user's contact list, the user's instant messages. So we just want to verify that the user really wants to do that. I'm going to click on Manually Sign In. Every time I visit this particular website, I'm going to need to click on the Sign In button in order to sign in. So the Sign In alert box comes in, and if we go back here, we see that I'm signed in here, MIX3, and there's no personal message, so I'm going to say Viva Mix Las Vegas to set the personal message. And if I come back over here, the personal message is set. So that is basically how you sign a user into the Messenger system. Fairly straightforward. But some of you are probably maybe thinking, well, what about those dozens or hundreds of contacts that my user has? You know, that's what I'm really interested in. I want to let my user get access to their friends and send the instant messages and that stuff. So that's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to create a piece of contact list UI, like you saw in the iBlocks example, and I'm going to show you how you actually show the presence of the contacts using the Messenger library. Basically, what you need to do is you need to set some event handlers for changes in the presence of each of the contacts, and then you update the display based on the event as the events fire. So let me go back here. So I'm going to go back to the web page, and the first thing I need to do, I need to have a container to hold the user's contact list. So I just create an empty container here that I'm going to populate with the user's contacts once I sign the user in. And I'm actually done with the web page. So the next thing I do is I go back to my sign-in event handler here, and I'm going to, when the user signs in, that's the time at which I actually get access to the user's contact list. I'm going to call a method to then look at, get access to the user's contacts, and then populate that contact container there. So that's what I have here. So if I come up here, this is the definition of the populate contact list function. So I get a pointer to that contact list container, and then I access the user's contact list. In the Messenger library, there's a concept called the contact collection, which is the contact list. So in JavaScript, you get the contact collection using this syntax. And then in the Messenger library, we have a specific way of enumerating through these collections. So that's what this piece of code is doing. This gets the current element that I'm iterating over, and I'm going to create a contact item for each one of these contacts. So create contact item is basically just going to create some HTML for that particular contact and then append it. And here I'm just going to append that piece of HTML into the contact list container. For each contact, I take the contact object that was passed in. I first create a little bit of dynamically, I create some HTML to hold the, the data for that particular contact. I just create a little container for the contact itself, and then 3 text spans to hold the presence for that particular contact. So that's the display name, status, and the personal message. And then I put those into that container. Next, I'm going to call a couple of helper functions to initialize their presence. So now it happens that when a user signs into the Messenger library, all their contacts are initially offline. So in order to actually show the correct presence, especially as things change, I need to attach an event handler to this contact so that when the presence changes come in, I can update the contact item UI appropriately. So this function, helper function there, is going to create that event handler and attach it to the contact. That's what I have here next. And what I do is I pass in the contact object itself as well as the 3 display elements that I want the presence to show up. What I do is I take the contact and I get its what's called its IAM address. I get the presence of that IAM address, and then I add a property change event handler for the presence of that contact. So basically, this is attaching a callback function to any changes to any presence property for that contact. And the function itself, I'm creating an anonymous function here. To do that, it has again the same 2-argument pattern. And when this gets called, I first find out which presence property changed. So in the event parameter, I can find out which presence property actually changed for this user. And then, based on which property changed, if it was the status, I call helper functions to update the status, and ditto for the display name and personal status. And last, I just show the helper functions. To each of the helper functions, I basically pass the relevant presence data for that contact and the HTML element. So based on whatever the data is, I take the element and set the inner text to an appropriate value. So in the case of status, if the user status is offline, I just set the text to offline. And similarly for display name personal message, I take the HTML element, set the inner text to whatever the appropriate value is, whatever the newly updated display name or personal message for that user. So now we can go ahead and try that. So again, I sign in, and yeah, that's the right user. Just take a second, and now it shows, again, this contact list. Not, the most beautiful UI. That's what the design sessions are for. So anyway, you can see that here, for example, my account, this is the account I signed into iBlocks. This is the one I signed into Multimap. This is the account I have here signed into the client. So I'm going to set my personal message, create audience, and if you wait a second, it'll show up right here. So again, with a simple event handler, you can both display, the initial presence of all the users and then handle any updates that come up. So Now, the next thing we need to do, the last thing we need to do, is to handle the creation to add interactivity to our applications. And so now you can see the contacts of the user. So the last thing we need to do, again, is to let your user, your website visitor, be able to reach out to their contacts through interactive messaging. So just as with the contacts, we had something called the contact collection. For messaging, the Messenger library has for each user something called the conversation collection. That's where all the IM conversations are, both IM conversations that the user creates by double-clicking on a contact, sending a message, as well as any incoming conversations, incoming messages. Those are all collected in this conversation collection. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach an event handler for the creation of new conversations in this collection. And by doing that, I'm going to handle both outgoing and incoming conversations. Whenever there's a new conversation created, I'm going to create a new piece of UI to handle that conversation. And for each conversation, when the conversation is created, I'm going to attach to that, each of those conversations, event handlers to handle messages in those conversations. And whenever a message comes in for a particular conversation, that's the time at which I show it in the UI. It's fairly straightforward. So let's go back to our application. Again, I need to add a place to hold the conversations. So I'm just going to, again, have a simple, HTML container here to do that. And then I'm going to go back to my sign-in handler here and add, attach event handler for changes in that conversation collection. So in JavaScript, you get at the conversation collection by calling user.getConversations, and then you add an event handler for changes in the user's conversation collection. And we'll get to that in a second. The next thing I want to do is I want to actually offer the ability, if the user clicks on double clicks on a particular contact in the contact list, I want to start a new IM conversation. So I'm going to add a double-click event handler. I'm going back to my helper function that created the HTML for a particular contact, and then I just attach a standard event, a double-click event, and I'm going to create an event handler for this particular contact for the double-click event to create a conversation. So now let's just go to the bottom, and I'm going to add the handlers for the conversations and the messages. So if we go up here, so this is the double-click event handler for a particular contact. So at this point, I've double-clicked on a particular piece of HTML. It's referencing a specific contact. So what I do is I look at whether or not that contact is actually online. If the user is online, then I get the conversation collection for my user, and then I create a new conversation calling the create method, passing in the address of that contact. If that contact is offline, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to bother creating a new conversation. Next, what we have here is so if you're familiar with .NET programming for collections, there's this concept of collection change notifications and collection change notification event handlers. So that's what this is following the programming pattern. Basically, you get told which things get added to a collection. You just need to handle the new ones. So I take each new conversation that gets created in the conversation collection, and then I create a conversation item, by which, again, I mean a conversation, a piece of HTML for a particular conversation. And that's what this is here. I dynamically create some HTML for a particular conversation. I have a container to contain the whole conversation. Then I have an area where I'm going to have the conversation history, the list, the list of messages that have been typed, a text area where the user types in their instant messages, and then a button to let the user send the message. Then I just put that into the container, and then I create, again, 2 event handlers. So I first so I have this button here, the send button for sending the message. For that, I'm going to create a message send event handler and attach that event. And then whenever I receive messages in this conversation object, then I'm going to create another event handler and attach it to that. Last thing I do is I just attach this conversation item to the conversation collection. So the next thing is the function that creates an event handler for sending a message in this particular conversation. So when the user clicks on a button to send a message, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a messenger library text message object, and I initialize it with the value of the text area where the user typed in the input. So that creates a text message object. I take the conversation, and I call the send message method of the conversation with that message. That'll actually send the message to the other party. And at that point, I also call a helper function to display that message in the message history, and then I reset the text area to be empty. As far as when I receive a message, I check the type of the message that I receive. If it's a text message type, right here, then I display it in my conversation history. Now, in Messenger, there are multiple types of messages. For example, there are things called nudges. You may be familiar with it. If you do a nudge, then your conversation window kind of shakes on your screen. So we're not going to support that. We're just going to support text-type messages. That's what this is. Last thing is a helper function to display a single message. So again, I dynamically create a container for the message, and then display who sent the message and the message itself. So who sent the message? So these message objects in the messenger library have some structure. So I can get at the sender of the message. I look at the presence of the sender of the message, and that's where I can find the display name of that user. So I'm going to, in my IM message UI, I'm going to show the display name of the person who sent the message, and then I call this helper function for the actual message itself. So the create text element function returns a piece of HTML that you can directly embed into your page. So why do we give you that? So in Messenger, as you may be familiar, there are a number of standard emoticons like smiley icons and stuff. So if the other party sends you one of those emoticons, this helper function gives you a piece of HTML that has the right image tag embedded in it with the links to images that we host. So basically, it just saves you a bit of programming for standard scenarios. Then I just append it to the conversation history, and now we're ready to go. So same thing again. Sign-in controls show up. Take a second, and I sign in. My contact list will show up. And I can now double-click, and I get a little conversation window. Again, not the best UI design. We have separate tracks for designers who are extremely, extremely skilled in those skills. So, hi there, and we'll send that. We should receive that in our IM. We'll just close this one here. The other thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back. So, it's HTTP. Oh, here we go. So I have received the message, and I'll just say hi back. Oops. And it's right there. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to iBlocks. So if we look at my contact list in iBlocks, here's MIX3, which is the test account I'm using. So I'm going to actually say, hey, come join me in MIX08 to watch this video. And then I'll go back to the sample application. And so at this point, as if you were in Angus's talk, he mentioned there's some HTTP polling going on. So it'll take a second for it to show up. But yeah, here. So now I have the incoming messages here as well. So again, by just listening for changes in that conversation collection, I've handled both the creation of messages that my user creates as well as incoming conversations. So really, it kind of gets simplified the way you handle conversations, both outgoing and incoming. So that's pretty much it for this portion of the talk. Let me get back to my slide. So now, again, you've seen a couple of examples of websites that have incorporated real-time messaging functionality. And you've seen in JavaScript how it's actually pretty simple, right? It's fairly straightforward. You sign in a user. You can get at the contact collection. It's really easy to scan through that, and as well it's easy to create and receive messages. Now, if you're a C# programmer, you may have been sitting, in this session going, well, what is that stuff on the screen? I don't really recognize that stuff. So for those people, I'm now going to invite Nikhil Kothari from the developer division, who's going to talk about some really great ways for programming messenger library applications.
Thanks, KG, for the introduction. As KG told, I work in the developer division at Microsoft, and he also mentioned, gave a little introduction to Script Sharp. I just wanted to get, we have a small audience here, but a show of hands, how many people actually are C# developers that want to see leveraging those skills in developing Ajax apps? See a few hands go up. I see a lot of hands go up. That's cool. So Script Sharp is basically a compiler that takes your C# source and generates JavaScript, regular JavaScript that runs across all browsers and multiple platforms. And the Messenger library, the dev team in Messenger actually was an early adopter of Script Sharp and used it to implement their library that you saw KG demo to build applications. And I'm really excited to see the team actually offer this as an option to other developers building on top of their library and to derive the same productivity benefits, as well as, frankly, fun developing these kinds of applications using a much better tool set. So I'm going to demo Script Sharp just a little bit to kind of show you an equivalent kind of application that KG wrote and speak to Script Sharp in that messenger context. However, you can actually find much more documentation and tutorials on the online site, which is codeplex.com/scriptsharp. So with that, let me switch over to my demo box. Ooh, OK, there you go. So I have an application all written. It's functionally equivalent to KG's app. Come on. Just thinking. All right. So basically what I have is a Visual Studio solution with a C# project. It's a regular C# project. And here's the particular project, the Messenger application project. And it has a set of references, and as you can see, there's a Microsoft.live.messenger assembly reference, and this is all of the API definitions are in this assembly. In addition to that, I basically have some code files, which makes up my application. For example, I have a messenger application class, and this class here does the same. It goes through the same sequence of things. For example, it creates a sign and control. Subscribes to the authentication completed event, implements the event handler for the authentication completed event. But the key thing that you're seeing here is obviously C# syntax. So it's very natural to go write a class. It's very natural to go encapsulate your data in a class as a private member variable, right? So these are all things that come very naturally in a syntax like C#. So in addition to that, I've got these couple of classes that manage a contact and their presence events, manages conversations and conversation events. Same thing that KG was doing. So let me actually build this. And this just ran the C# compiler, made sure your source was valid, and then ran the Script Sharp compiler, which generates scripts. And what I have here is the script equivalent of that code. And you can see it looks almost identical to what KG wrote in terms of all the syntax. In addition, because this is a compiler, it can generate multiple flavors of your script. For example, it generates a release build as well, which is shrunk down. It minimizes away white space. It minimizes private members. All of that comes for free. So let's keep going. What I have here is, as I said, functionally equivalent, but I actually need to implement the functionality to start a conversation. I have left that out for the demo. And I'm going to go ahead and I've got a private member called the user. And as you can see, I get IntelliSense. And I can say create. And IntelliSense tells me it takes an IM address, but for the sake of the demo, I'm going to ignore that and actually pass in a contact. And these kinds of errors, typos, or passing in the wrong things are very common in Ajax apps and are a headache to actually go debug. Because this is a compiler, I can actually now see I get build errors, saying, hey, this is the invalid argument. So I can actually get all of this information at build time rather than at runtime. So obviously I can go fix that and use the current address and now compile again. And that builds it. There you go. So one of the benefits of using C# is not just the IntelliSense and the build errors, but using all of the functionality of Visual Studio and .NET Tools. And just to kind of give you a flavor of that, I'm going to take this block of code, which creates the UI for the contact list, and I'm going to select that and choose to refactor it into a method. So I'm going to choose the extract method, refactoring method, and call it show contacts. And now you can see Visual Studio, the C# editor, went ahead and created a method called show contacts, and then it replaced that code in here with a call to that method. And this is just a very simple refactoring kind of scenario. You can imagine if you have a very large project that just having the ability to know what code's going to change when you make a particular edit to your code base or refactor your code base comes really in handy. So at this point, I can build. I actually won't run this because it's the same application. And I'll be back here for questions if there are any on Script Sharp. If not, I'll hand it back to KG to wrap it up and talk a little bit more about Messenger. You want to switch back?
Thank you, Nikhil.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So now you've seen how you can build websites incorporating Messenger functionality. If you're a JavaScript developer, we love to work with you. If you're a C# developer, we love to work with you. And actually, we'll have a little bit time at the end, so I may actually show you another example of how you can use Script Sharp. But before I do that, I just want to, as Nikhil indicated, start to wrap up a little bit. Now, what you've seen so far is kind of gets at the power that the Messenger library offers to web applications. Lets you get at a user's contact list, send messages for a user. You can look at all the messages that a user is receiving. So that's a lot of kind of private data and stuff, and a lot of power that is put in the hands of the application. So now with great power comes, of course, great responsibility. So I'm going to talk about that for a second in terms of the guidelines for Messenger library applications. Now, if you think back, to the size of the Messenger community, with 300 million users, it's actually growing double digits. We wouldn't grow to be this large community if our users didn't trust us. They didn't trust us with with their private data, didn't trust us to be able to, send and receive messages. So we want to offer, web developers everywhere the ability to tap into that community. But we also want to make sure that our end users continue to be able to rely on our service and to be able to rely on Messenger as something that they can entrust, that they can keep in touch with their friends and family. So the guidelines there are a few design guidelines in terms of use that we ask for Messenger library applications. The details are referenced again on our website for dev.live.com. And I just want to say a couple of words about kind of the thinking behind the terms of use and the design guidelines. I'm not going to go into the details, but really the principles that we follow and we want Messenger applications to follow is, number one, that the end user is in full control. It's really that, we're building these applications for the end user. And so they should be in full control. They control when they sign in. They control, what happens to their data. And secondly, we ask that applications respect the privacy of both the end user as well as all of the end user's contacts. So again, you're as an application, you can see the messages that other people, a user's friends are typing at to your user. And so that's private information again. So as long as, and our design guidelines and terms are based on these principles, end user in control, respecting privacy of users and their contacts. So as long as you keep those in mind, then there's a great opportunity for you to build web capable messenger applications, to join this 300 million community and actually help it to grow and create a really successful ecosystem. So, again, in terms of resources, I've set up a time tomorrow in the open space area. If you want to go into more details, I'll be there from 4:15 to 5:30, at least as I currently plan. So I think I set up a particular number. I don't remember which one it is. So if you go over there, you'll see a pointer to where that'll be. I'll just be hanging out during that time. If you want to, if you have questions, if you want to see more of the code, if you want to see more demos, we'll be there and to answer any questions. For the actual resources, go to dev.live.com Messenger. That has links to all the documentation and samples. And let me actually go, let's see here. I have it right here. This is, if you've seen Windows Live, dev.live.com before, this is the new site that actually just launched today. As you can see, Windows Live Messenger Libraries featured here. You can go to Messaging and Messenger. That's the place where you have a link to the Messenger library itself, the Messenger library docs, as well as the other APIs that we have. So you just go there. The terms and stuff, the terms of service are linked right up here. So you just go there. And we also have a blog there that we'll be posting updates to as we release any updates, code, or samples, or so on. So we welcome you to go there. And again, for ScriptSharp, the place is coplex.com, ScriptSharp. So in summary, there's a great amount of power that the Windows Live Messenger library offers to web developers. It invites you, it gives you the ability to grow your audience on the web and to make your site stickier by offering capabilities to let your users spend more time on your website. So again, you can start doing all of this right now, today, by going to dev.live.com Messenger. And I can open up to questions. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and show you. By the way, if you have really detailed questions, we have the main developer, Steve, up here. And he finished this piece of code very, very, very recently. So this is actually, so I mentioned earlier, so you saw ScriptSharp, the power that it offers. And I actually had promised Nikhil I'm not going to show this, but since we have time, I'll show it anyway. So this is actually a C# wrapper that lets a Silverlight 2 application call out to the Messenger library running in the browser host. So it basically offers the same object model that's offered for ScriptSharp developers to Silverlight 2 developers. So this is just a early sample. We hope to be releasing this at some point in the next few weeks. So we'll just show you a little example. I need to stop that one, and let's go get started. So again, it's going to show me that sign-in control. But as you can see, there's actually a little bit of a Silverlight UI here. So I'm going to sign in. I'm going to pick that same account. And in a second, as you can see, now I have, so this is XAML UI running in Silverlight 2 right here in the browser. Again, it shows the same, the contact list experience. And if I click here, I get a little chat box. If you follow Scott Gu's blog, this is kind of similar to what he's posted. So I could say hi. And again, in a second, I should be receiving, and actually, the way it works in Messenger, it reuses the same window for the same person. So yeah, it just shows up right here. So that's another example. Like we said, we give you a choice. Obviously, if it works in Silverlight 2, you actually get a choice not only of just C#, but all of the Silverlight languages to code your Messenger application. So with that, I'll go to questions, and I want to welcome Nikhil back up here as well. Questions? Yeah. Yes.
How do you guys feel about given the sort of the
So the question is, addressing again that idea of the great power and the great responsibility. The specific question was, how do we feel about the ability for applications to send instant messages? Specifically, in particular, if the end user isn't aware that that instant message was being sent out. So that's one of the things that is prohibited in the terms of use. So that's something that we don't, again, the principle, again, that we talked about is respect the privacy of the end user as well as the end user's contact. So obviously, sending a message that, the user doesn't know about essentially, goes against both sides of that principle. So it's not something that, we welcome. So the question is, is it sufficient to have the terms of service? So that's something, we'll be monitoring closely in terms of how we enable that. So if we find that, it's being misused a lot, then obviously we'll look at the mitigations for that. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Bring in IM-enabled contact.
Yeah.
I don't want to display the user's Hotmail context that might be 100+ long.
Yeah. So the question is, can I filter out essentially in this specific question the Hotmail contacts for a user? So the Messenger library actually only returns the IM-enabled contacts in your contact list. So it's really tailored to being an IM library. Yes. So if I hear correctly, the question is there a way for a user to be anonymous? And the answer is no. The user in beta 1, they all need to be authenticated with Windows Live ID. Yeah. Yes?
Can a conversation can span multiple pages? And what happens when a user is logged on several websites using the same ID?
So I think the question was, can a conversation span multiple sites? So one thing that I didn't actually touch on is that the Messenger library does actually enable simultaneous sign-ins from web pages. Now, in the current version of the Messenger desktop client, that, as you probably are familiar, only lets you be signed into one place at a time. So you have a choice of being signed into either one or more web pages or in the desktop client. But you can be in multiple web pages at the same time if you're not signed into the desktop client. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, feel free to add on or come up later.
What I was thinking of was, if you have a website that is IM-enabled,
Uh-huh.
to have your session move through the site.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at is so any website that is, that the user signed in at a time will have the ability to have, the message that the user is receiving. So if I receive one message, I'm going to get it in every website that I'm signed in on. Now, I think maybe I'm jumping ahead, but, kind of some of the things that, then starts to become kind of interesting is, well, what about the message that I received on site A, 5 minutes ago? Can I see that in site B? And so that's not something we can do. Like, we don't keep track of, the history of the conversation. But
I think his question is, within his site, he's traversing through multiple, think of Yahoo, and you're going from finance to something.
okay.
Whether the conversation can follow.
Yeah, so if the question is, within a particular website, can you go from page to page? So the Messenger library is primarily targeted at AJAX applications. So it doesn't, it won't work quite as well for cases where, you go from page to page. That essentially ends up, having to sign the user out and in again and again and again, which is not very efficient. So it's really optimal for AJAX-style applications, but we'd love to hear feedback in terms of anticipated usages that might be impacted by that.
I'd like to add a note to that, and it's not just about AJAX application, but I think you want to think about the navigation structure of your application, where it's almost like if you want to maintain a conversation history, you almost have a frame in your site that is the current user's sort of presence and set of conversations, and you're navigating the rest of your site or updating the rest of your site without disposing or without cleaning up the signed-in user's sort of state. Does that make sense? Is that?
Sorry.
Yeah, you had a question, sorry.
With that, if you opt in to automatically sign in, it will just sign you into that. So you can pick up the conversation between pages and pull up the history of the conversation. So this isn't just for full Ajax pages. It should work, but there may be quite a few signs in and signs out. So
Yeah, it's actually not behavior that we probably encourage. So, yeah, you had a question, sorry.
If you have an IM-enabled site that's on HTTPS,
That HTTPS?
and you did with Modicon, that's an image coming from hosted, how's that going?
So currently HTTPS is not actually supported. So if you have scenarios that require it, we'd love to understand it. I mean,
Like if you wanted to have people come to your site, that then you could let them know that at least their conversations and their data on that site's going to be secure. Say you're using the message for a business purpose, and you want to be able to let message contact.
yeah, again, we haven't heard strong demand to date for HTTPS support, but yeah. So right now, yeah, it's not supported, but it's technically feasible. Somebody over here? No. All right. Any more questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So you're using this channel.html.htm
Yeah.
to get around the cross-domain issues. There's some magic going on there, I know. So basically, you've got there's an HTTP API to the messenger service that this library is talking to, right?
Yeah. So the question was around this. In the initiating the signing control, we're talking about this thing called the channel file, and that facilitates communication between the application domain and the messenger service domains.
Right. Exactly. But is that API itself published? The HTTP API there?
To date, Microsoft has not published the underlying protocols for that.
All right. So, it wouldn't be advisable to reverse engineer the library to
You can talk to some of our business folks who are in the audience.
Okay. There you go. Thank you. That answers the question. The other question I had is for this HTTP, you're doing a polling thing. So are you doing long polling or just periodic polling? Meaning, do you end up holding a connection open, or do you just hit and then a little while later hit again?
So the question is about the nature of the polling. Why did you come up after the talk, and we can talk about that in more detail. Yeah. So it's kind of adaptive. It depends on like the activity that's going on.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. So. Anything else?
Is that what's responsible for the latency of the delivery of the messages from the web client to, say, the messenger client, or vice versa?
It can be, yeah. Especially so the messenger client itself, the desktop client supports connecting through HTTP, depending on whether you're like behind a firewall or something. So in that case, also, there's some latency involved. So if both sides are behind HTTP firewalls or something, then naturally, there's going to be a little more latency involved with that. Yeah. In practice, what we've heard is that the developers feel that the library is very responsive. I mean, so today, like you've actually seen both ends of the sending the message and receiving the message. Most of the time, actually, people don't actually experience that. So, for the API itself, the feedback so far has been that it's very, very responsive. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
One important thing to call out on that is the delay is mainly on invite. So the actual setting up of the session and once
Right.
the session is established should be very fast.
Yeah, correct. So the comment is when you do see delays, especially in the IAM, it's usually just in the initial session establishment. So once the session is actually created, then the message flow is pretty instantaneous. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, one question over there.
Oh, yeah.
So on the script sharp side of things, I got two questions. One is there, do you include some notion of user interface concepts or HTML objects in the C# land, or is it
Yeah.
pretty much strict to,
I think I'm on D.
Yeah.
is it pretty low level, or is there sort of like high level controls?
There.
I'm more familiarity with the Google Web Toolkit and how it's got a set of controls that you can use, but
Right.
there's limitations there.
So I'll answer your first question. Is it up there? No.
Let's see.
It's D.
Or D?
Yep. This one.
This one. There we go.
So what I had up here was using system.html, and this actually is the namespace that contains various HTML elements. So you can see there's a div, there's document, and so on and so forth. And so this represents the API that you have in the browser.
So it's low level, so you can pretty much
Right. So this is basically what you get in script. Script comes with some examples of some higher level constructs like animation library, a control model, those types of things. A messenger, as far as I know, doesn't use that. And then various people who've been building on top of Script have built very specific custom for their application, optimized kind of control libraries.
That makes a lot of sense. So, kind of continuing down that vein, Script and is very similar to the Google Web Toolkit in terms of how it goes. Difference being C# versus Java as the main language. Aside from whether you prefer C# or Java, is there a reason to use Script?
So they are similar. I think the similarity is along the sort of the core philosophy of looking at JavaScript as a target language, right? I think there's a little more than just the language, C# versus Java, because a lot of programs are in fact used to both. And then if you look at JavaScript, it has similarities to both, right? I think it comes down to more than just a language thing. It's that tooling thing. Do you want to use Visual Studio? Do you want to use the other .NET tooling? I think that's probably a more fuller kind of evaluation on each person. It's a subjective evaluation of what you prefer that goes beyond language.
So aside from language or tool set selection, is there a difference in philosophy that makes Script more flexible or better suited to certain purposes or anything like that?
I probably can't speak to specific comparison. Both have interesting characteristics. I think that both GWT and Script will probably can speak to.
Anything else?
So, this code
So Scriptshop was, so it grew out of a personal project. There's a virtual team at Microsoft. Steve and actually the Messenger team are actually a big part of that virtual team. Recently I put it on Codeplex to kind of increase the appeal in a broader community. And the goal is to eventually kind of make it more and more open. That's the eventual goal. And get some community, more community involved in it. There are lots of internal and external users, and Wei, who's actually asking the question, is a user of it as well from Facebook.